Hello and welcome to Latika Takes, a podcast with me, Latika Berg. Hi everyone and welcome back to another episode of Latika Takes. Well, it's actually a new year, so I guess welcome to a new year of the podcast. I'm really looking forward to it because it's just going to be a mental year, isn't it? Let's face it. I wanted to begin this year by looking just slightly back because I think what happened on Christmas Eve might have gone a little bit unnoticed. On Christmas Eve, the Hong Kong authorities did something not so much surprising, but gobsmacking. They revoked the passports of a bunch of Hong Kong democracy activists living overseas, including some of those who've never held Hong Kong passports. You're going to hear about that. The other thing they did was impose or place bounties on the heads of a bunch more democracy activists living overseas. One of those was 19-year-old Chloe Cheung, who lives here in the UK. Now, these bounties have been a huge issue over the last few years, and it's something I've been covering because they affect two Hong Kongers living in Australia. You're going to hear about them during the program. And my other guest on the program, Finn Lau. He's one of many who had bounties placed on their heads after the CCP's crackdown in Hong Kong. So I thought it would be great to get Chloe and Finn together because Finn could tell us about his experiences living with a bounty on his head in another country, what he fears, what he doesn't. And this is Chloe's first extended interview since Christmas Eve. I was struck by her clarity, by her analysis of such a complex geopolitical situation, but mostly how she did not really set out to be an activist, that she came here to study, and that actually what the CCP was doing in Hong Kong radicalized her. I began by asking both Finn, but first Chloe, what they liked about Hong Kong. What life was like, what they learnt about at school, what they miss, and what they liked eating.
So I was born and grew up in Hong Kong. I was 15 years old when I left, so I don't have a lot of memory of Hong Kong, but I do remember some pictures. Like I I went to school in the morning, and Hong Kong is very packed with lots of people, so I have to wait for everything. Like even like going to school, I have to wait for buses. I have to um like literally to wait for everything. And I love Hong Kong because there are lots of good food. Whenever I walked on the street, every few meters there are some good restaurants and some Hong Kong street food like a really cheap price. And that's my most favorite thing in Hong Kong, and that's what I found the hardest to find in England, because there are not a lot of street food in England, and there are lots in Hong Kong. So I think
There's actually not a lot of good Asian food in England, but I'll be the person that says that. You two can just politely disagree or agree. So would you describe your upbringing in Hong Kong as happy? Were you happy in Hong Kong?
Well, I would say I am happy growing up in Hong Kong because I love the culture. I love the people. Hong Kongers are really straightforward. They are really like funny when they talk about different issues. They have their like funny insight for some reason, and I really love I really love Hong Kong because of the Hong Kongers. Um, I would say my favorite thing in Hong Kong, it's really the food and also the convenient transport and the 24 hours shops, like the convenience shops, because like there are 7-Elevens in Hong Kong that open 24 hours a day. So whenever I was hungry, I could just go to 7-Eleven. But now like it's like after 10 p.m., it's really hard to find somewhere that that sells good food.
I feel your pain. I had the best dumplings in my life in Hong Kong. I'm going to say that. It was at the Ritz, I think over on the other side, Kowloon.
Kowloon,
Yeah,
Kowloon.
the best. I loved the food in Hong Kong. Absolutely amazing. So You're only 19, Chloe. That's young even now to become involved in politics or have an interest in it. What age did you start becoming interested in politics when you're living in Hong Kong, and what brought you to that?
Basically, I am not interested in politics until 2019 movement happened. So on
And how old were you?
I was 14 years old in
Okay, that's young.
2019. Yeah, that's quite young, but that's not that young.
Mm.
So basically, my parents are not involved in politics at all. They just earn their living. They just go to travel like normal Hong Kongers. And until in 2019, when I like one day when I was at school, there are some seniors students who come to tell us what happened in Hong Kong. They said, oh, the government is trying to pass the extradition bill that could send Hong Kongers to China. And because of course we know the June 4th massacre, that's why we are kind of like scared about what would happen to us. And as a Hong Konger who love Hong Kong, we knew that it's time for us to step out on the street, to go to the protests and to fight for the freedom in Hong Kong and to stop the bill going through. And that's the first time I actually went to a protest. That was on the 12th of June, as I remember, the anniversary of
Hmm.
our movement. And by that time when I first when I first went to the protest, I thought it was a peaceful protest. I thought everything would just be all right because I thought we have the right to protest. We have the freedom of assembly, we have the freedom of speech under the basic law. It was protected by the time I thought. And when I was in the protest, I witnessed a policeman stepped on a protestor's neck. It was shocking for me. Um, yeah, and it completely changed my mind because I thought we are at a civil society that we have all the freedoms, and that's what I was taught at school as well.
Can I ask about that? In Hong Kong, what is the knowledge of how you're different to mainland Chinese when you're growing up? Who teaches you? Is it formal through school, or is it something that your parents hand down to you?
So in school, we were taught that Hong Kong and China are going in one country, two system,
Mm.
and we have freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of the press under the basic law. It was protected, and we were allowed to go to the protest anytime we want peacefully, and that's all covered in our textbook. And I knew after I left Hong Kong, they like these contents were all deleted now. So nowadays, if you go back to Hong Kong on the textbook, you can't see all these content. But by the time when I was in school, these are all on the textbook.
Fascinating. Finn Lau, was any of Chloe's upbringing, did that sound familiar to you? What was your upbringing in Hong Kong
Yeah,
like?
it's very similar, but there is a key difference is that I used to live in rural areas, so there are different kinds of rural villages in Hong Kong, not just very busy urban areas. So I need to wake up at say 5 to or maybe 6 a.m. every day, and then to take a school bus to Kowloon City, Kowloon Town, etc. That those are some city centers of Hong Kong, or maybe some urban areas to study, and then after school, then I need to take 1 to 2, at least 2 hours of school bus to go back to my home, and it could be maybe 7 or 6 p.m. already.
It's a long day.
It is a very long day for I would say more than 12 years. Yeah, and then yeah, so that was my childhood, and yeah, so I graduated I would say back in 2015. So when there was the 2014 umbrella movement, I was the final year student at one of the universities in Hong Kong. I was just a so-called ordinary protesters while sitting, or maybe protesting peacefully outside the Hong Kong government headquarters, etc.
And remind people, what was the umbrella movement in 2014 asking for? What was that protest aimed at?
So back in 2014, there was the so-called 31st of August decision coming from Beijing regime. So they want to impose a disqualification framework on the universal suffrage right of Hong Kongers. So the universal suffrage is something guaranteed under the main constitution of Hong Kong Basic Law. But then the Hong Kong people, including myself, we disagree with that kind of disqualification. It's not genuine universal suffrage. So that's why, thousands, if not millions of people will try to protest against that kind of undemocratic decision. But in the end, we failed because of the very, was a great difference between the soft and hard power between the Beijing regime and the Hong Kong people. But then, it also paved way for the 2019 Hong Kong movement.
Yeah, I was in Hong Kong that year, 2014, and I remember it was just the start of feeling like this isn't going well. But I must say the international community was not really as interested in Hong Kong then, because I remember sitting there reading the papers thinking this seems to be a bigger deal than we're all treating it. Do you think that actually if the international community had paid more attention then, the 2019 movement might not have even been needed? Or do you think this was an inevitable path for Hong Kong?
I would say it's an inevitable path because the 2014 is a painful lesson to Hong Kongers, and it is also a wake-up call to the international community. So before 2014, we didn't have this kind of large-scale protest. Well, the last one before the 2014 protest was the 2003 protest against the National Security Ordinance legislation. So you could see it's more than a decade before.
It's a long time.
Yeah. So after the 2014 umbrella movement, then we got different kinds of incidents, like the 2016 disqualification incidents to different candidates for the Legislative Council in Hong Kong, and then also paved way to the 2019 2 million people movement. And so I would say the 2019 Hong Kong movement is another alarming call to the international community because of its scale, because of the diversified tactics that different Hong Kongers deployed. We make use of technology, different kinds of ideology, be water, etc.
Would you say that your life in Hong Kong was a happy one?
Yes and no. Yeah, so I love Hong Kong, certainly. I love Hong Kong culture, Hong Kong food, Hong Kong languages like Cantonese, Hong Kong music, Hong Kong movies, etc. But then when I was studying at the university, I could witness the erosion of professional practices as well as other kinds of standards or maybe even integrity in Hong Kong, because there is the rising of the so-called Chinese standards. I could see more and more Hong Kong professionals need to go to mainland China to appease Beijing regime. So to provide a little bit more of my background as context is that I studied surveying in Hong Kong and I graduated to work in the infrastructure sector. So that's why I could witness this kind of things with my own eyes. And it is also the working environment and the declining standards, professional practices that makes me want to work in different international, especially democratic countries like the UK, Canada, etc.
Chloe, tell me how you came to be in the UK. 19 years of age is a very young age to move your life. I came to the UK when I was 17, and I know how scary that can be. You're here 19. How was your journey to the UK?
So I have to go back to what happened in Hong Kong. One time when I was in the protest, my name was marked by the police, but I was not arrested, fortunately, because I was in school uniform. But then in late 2020, the Beijing imposed a national security law in Hong Kong. That's when I started feeling really unsafe to stay in Hong Kong, and I spoke to my family. They all agreed, and we decided to move to the UK through the BNO visa scheme.
Mm-hmm. And how quickly did you make that decision? It's a big call because I presume you knew at this point going back it might never happen for your family.
Yeah, it would never happen to me anymore. But I would say, as I remember, I think from when we decided to when we actually leave Hong Kong, I think it's within 3 weeks or 4 weeks.
That's so rapid.
Yes, that's so rapid.
Wow.
So we are the first like group of Hong Kongers who arrived to UK, and I arrived in the UK in August 2020.
Okay, well, I'm glad it was at least warm, although that was the middle of a pandemic. So,
Yes.
what a crazy time.
Yes.
Finn, what was your journey to the UK like?
Well, to me, it's a little bit different because I worked in Hong Kong for 2 years after graduation, and then I relocated to Singapore to see how another international city looks like. And then spent around 2 years there, and then I relocated to London in 2019, 3 months before the 2019 Hong Kong movement protests began. And yeah, so it was quite different because at that time we didn't have the BNO visa scheme, which stands for the British National Overseas Visa. At that time, once I settled in London, I joined a protest outside the Chinese embassy and outside the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office to support Hong Kongers in the city on the ground, because I think that is something that we as Hong Kong people, we need to stand up against. And then time flies. It's 2025 now, and I spent 5 to 6 years here already.
Okay, so that strikes me as interesting, Finn. I didn't realize you weren't actually in the midst of that democracy movement, and yet you have a bounty on your head. So why is that?
So at that time, when I was standing outside the Chinese embassy, I just think that, there must be much more ways to pressure the Beijing regime and the Hong Kong government to drop the extradition bill. So that's why I was the first one to propose and organize something to call for sanctions and freezing the foreign citizenships held by those senior Hong Kong officials. Because I think if we seriously went after their personal interests, there may be a chance that they may drop the draconian bill. And then after that then I try to do more things with my teammates. I try to assemble on the Hong Kong version Reddit RHKG forum. And throughout the 6-month journey of the 2019 Hong Kong movement, I would say we do a lot of things like organizing protests, having global advertisement campaign on newspapers in different countries, as well as organizing visiting trips for parliamentarians from different parts of the world to Hong Kong, etc. And then I did go back to Hong Kong, and I was arrested on the first day of 2020 and got detained for 2 days.
And what was the reason?
So on the first day of 2020, I joined a 1 million protest on Hong Kong Island. And there were more than 400 people got arrested on that day. And at that time, the so-called charges was illegal assembly, because at that time they didn't figure out my identity as one of the key players of the movement. They didn't know I was the one who proposed to sanction those senior Hong Kong officials. So after detaining me for 2 days at the police station, then I would say they made a serious mistake of releasing me. But I've changed my mind and my plan to flee Hong Kong immediately. My original plan was to stay in Hong Kong for at least a month, and then I went back to the UK. I just told myself, I need to continue to fight, because it is highly likely that I could not go back to Hong Kong for a long time. It's just a matter of time they will figure out my identity. So in the same year, 7 months after I was arrested, they realized who I was, and they published and released different kinds of my personal information on newspapers in Hong Kong, together with arrest warrant, international arrest warrant.
So I remember covering this at the time. In one respect, it's a little bit laughable when you hear the Hong Kong authorities say, we're putting a bounty on the heads of all these Hong Kong activists who live in Australia, my native country, here in the UK, Canada. You're out of reach. In some ways, it's a stunt, right? But what does it feel like when you wake up and see you're the person whose warrant for arrest has been issued, and suddenly they're offering cash for people if they can lead to arrest? Do you take that seriously? Do you feel scared? Do you feel worried? Do you permanently look over your shoulder now?
So I got I would say at least the second arrest warrant, and as well as the first bounty in July 2023. I remember that was a gloomy morning in London, and I wake up, received tons of messages coming from different people. Some say, take care. Some people just send me a link to some news article. And then I just realized, I'm on the first run of Hong Kongers getting those so-called bounty from the Beijing regime and the Hong Kong government. And I well, it sounds ridiculous, but my first reaction was laughing because I have faced different kinds of transnational repression, like being followed by some suspicious people.
In the UK or where?
Yeah, in the UK.
Really?
Yeah, and even being approached by some well, fake journalists. So I just think that, well, in their toolbox of transnational repression or in their arsenal, they just well, adding one more weapons to silence Hong Kongers. But on my second thought, I just think that I try to analyze why they are doing so, because that was the first ever time that they deployed this kind of tactics towards Hong Kong diaspora. My analysis at that time is that they try to silence the Hong Kong community. They try to isolate us from the rest of the pro-democracy Hong Kong community as well. So I think that is the key aim, because they know that well, we are not afraid of them. We keep advocating for the democracy and freedom in Hong Kong. So they try to, I would say, somehow isolate us and discourage us from continue to do this kind of, well, our human rights work.
Don't get above your station. Don't do what these people do. They're now outcasts as much as it is threatening you. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Chloe, you're recently bountied, if that's the word we can use. What was your reaction like?
So I was preparing to sleep at the time when I knew that I got a bounty. My US colleague Francis texted me and said, "Oh, the Hong Kong government just placed a million Hong Kong dollar bounty on my head." And my first reaction was like, what? It's that true? Like it's unbelievable to me because I don't think I am in that position to get a bounty. Like, yeah, and
Well, it's almost a compliment, I suppose.
exactly. So, I mean, my first thought was quite shock, and I think I would say it's kind of an honor from the Hong Kong authorities because it proves that what I am doing was right. And now they were afraid of me, and that's why they have to place a bounty on me because they don't want other Hong Kongers to do what I was doing. So that's kind of proof that what I was doing exactly targeted what they don't want me to target.
Mm.
And however, after like some sort of like consideration or after I talked to other bounty Hong Kongers, I feel like a little bit unsafe to be in the UK. So I started to concern about my personal safety because I knew that like these like the bounty Hong Kongers were being followed, were intimidated after they got the bounty. So I was like, it's kind of a mixed future. Like, I knew that what I was doing was right, but at the same time, I was concerned about my personal safety and I was concerned about my future because I was 19 years old. I joined CFHK Foundation to do advocacy during my gap year. I was planning to go to uni next year and it all changed my plan because of the bounty. And it just came so sudden that I never expected. I thought it was just a normal gap year. I worked with CFHK, do advocacy, speak up for Hong Kongers who can't speak out in Hong Kong because that's my duty, that's my obligation, that's my responsibility. But it suddenly comes with a bounty and it actually changed everything. I was worried about my future, what job should I find, which university should I go because there are lots of Chinese students and lots of Chinese people are invested a lot in UK universities. So I don't know whether would it affect my application or would that affect my university life. And after the bounty, some of my friends actually messaged me and said, "Oh, sorry, Chloe, but I can't keep in touch with you because we have to go back to Hong Kong." And we are
So these are your Hong Kong
yeah,
friends?
these are my Hong Kong
Are
friends.
these friends in Hong Kong or are these friends abroad?
So
Or
both. Yeah. And
wow,
I
that's
mean,
hard.
it's really hard, but I do understand why they did that. And it's not their fault because the Hong Kong authorities created that environment and to put them in that position. So it's not anyone's fault. It's not anyone's fault. It's the government's fault. So yeah, lots of these stuff happened after I was bountied.
Finn, does it materially change your life?
I would say Chloe described very accurately. Well, to her, well, it could be difficulty to get into the university, but to me, it could be difficulty to get into professional practices again, because there are lots of well, MNC, those international firms, they got, well, great interest in the Chinese market or maybe Hong Kong market. So that's why it could isolate us from, I would say, on different aspects.
But you haven't experienced this yet, right? This is just at the moment something you're worried about.
Yeah, so well, I am fortunate to return to, well, in the infrastructure sector last year, but I would say it's just a pure luck. After all, well, for some companies that got maybe serious background check, or maybe they define a so-called crime according to maybe not the UK law, then I could get into trouble. So I gave myself around 2 to 3 years of time to focus on efficacy. But then I will try to strike a balance between this. But it's very difficult to many of us in terms of striking a balance between different parts of our life and our life goals.
Do you actually, either of you, fear that it will meaningfully lead to your arrest? Or do you think that bit is a bit of theatre? Do you actually feel like somebody could hand you in?
Yeah, there's certainly such a risk, and the bounty escalate that risk significantly, because back in 2015, we got the Hong Kong Causeway Bay bookstore incident. Well, for more background, is that that bookstore, well, they publish a number of books about maybe Xi Jinping or other senior Beijing officials' stories. And then five of them got kidnapped from different parts of the world. One of them is, well, is a Swedish citizen called Guaiman Hoi, and he got kidnapped in Thailand without passing through the security borders, without, well, taking the plane. We don't know how they do it. And they even kidnapped someone in Hong Kong. At that time, we still got a little bit rule of law in Hong Kong. Yeah, but then they simply kidnap people. So that's why we are highly alert.
Yeah.
Is that the same for you, Chloe?
I would say it's the same. And also, given the example of there was a Hong Konger who are protesting outside the Chinese embassy in Manchester, and he was dragged into the embassy by the embassy staff, and the UK police stepped in to drag him out of the embassy and saved him eventually. But it's not that lucky every time, and we saw that there are no consequences for the embassy staff. They are not expelled. They are not arrested at all. So given that was an example, we don't know how much the UK government is willing to protect us. If they wanted trade with China, they wanted to have a good relationship with China, we don't know how much are they willing to do to protect us, or how much are they willing to give up to protect us.
And besides Chloe's point, I want to point out that the transnational repression or this kind of behavior from the Beijing regime is not just a human rights issue, it is a security issue to different democratic countries. For example, to the UK, to Australia, to the US, Canada, etc. The Chinese Beijing regime, they are simply, well, encroaching on the civil liberties, on the freedom of expression, on different democratic soils. So in Australia, we got, well, two other Hong Kong activists who got a
I speak
bounty.
to them very often, Kevin Yam and Ted Hugh.
Yes.
Yeah.
Two fantastic guys. I write stories about them and with them a lot. They're really good people.
Yeah, we went to the Australian Parliament to advocate for Hong Kong issues, Hong Kong human rights and freedom issues. I think that may be part of the reasons why we got the bounty together in 2023. And then another issue that we haven't mentioned is that at least there are 1/3 of countries that we couldn't visit anymore because of the extradition
Because
treaties.
they would hand you in.
Yeah.
Yes, because
Yeah.
of the extradition bill that they have with Hong Kong
Of
or China.
course, of course. So there's a whole part of the world you just can't travel or even stop over in, I imagine.
Yeah, I couldn't see the Egypt pyramid or maybe Machu Picchu in Peru anymore. There are lots of countries that we couldn't go or even take a transit flight, like Southeast Asian countries.
Wow, it really does materially change things, even if no one in the UK would ever betray you. It does actually make a huge difference. So, how supported do you feel by the UK government? How supported do you feel by the UK society? And in that, I mean other human rights organizations, the media, even your social circles? What kind of support do you feel you get? And don't be afraid to say where you might think it's a bit deficient. I think everyone's big enough to hear some criticism if you've got it.
I would say I have some like UK friends and also media journalists. They are really, really super supportive and helpful. In terms of the government, I would say on the day that I got the bounty, the Metropolitan Police contacted me at that moment and they said like if you need any help, they could offer it, and so don't be scared to reach out, and said they have a policy to contact everyone who got a bounty in the UK soil. So that's what they have to do on a regular basis. And I think, I mean, it's fine. It's good that they contact me, but till now the intelligence service did not contact me, and I feel like it's kind of I have a contradiction feeling towards the UK government because like my MP are really supportive, and
And who's your MP?
Max Hewitt's MP, my
Okay.
MP is really
And you
supportive.
just met your MP, I believe.
Yes, I did.
So that's a good show of support, right?
Yes, I think so. And like however, Rachel Reeves just went to China a few days ago, and I mean she secured some investment from China to the UK. At the same time, Catherine West said she would try her best to protect Hong Kongers, etc., etc. So it was kind of really contradictory when some officials are saying that they would try their best to support Hong Kongers, and some officials said that they need China, they need to engage with China, they need investment from China. On my point of view, I feel like it's absolutely fine if you want to engage with China, but you should prioritize human rights a little bit more than trade. And it like it doesn't mean that you have to stop all the trade with China. It just means that you have to stop over reliance on China. Don't just get all the money from them. Talk about what you need from the UK point of view, but not just agree whatever terms and conditions that the Chinese government want and just say yes to everything they want because you need China. It's not the case. You can ask for other countries help, but not just China. I mean, that's what I think as a Hong Konger.
Finn, what about you? You've had a bounty on your head a bit longer. What's the support from the government been like for you?
Well, this is a very good question because I've witnessed a very steep learning curve to the UK government. And, well, to be honest, there are lots of improvements since 2020, but there are much more things to do when it comes to the China issue or human rights issue with the Beijing regime. So back in 2020, when I got my first arrest warrant from the Hong Kong authority, I tried to suggest to initiate a meeting with the Home Office, the UK Home Office, but then they refused to meet at all. And then fast forward in 2023 when I got the bounty, finally the Home Office agreed to have a meeting with me, including a meeting with FCDO, the Foreign Office of the UK. And it was also the first time that the Metropolitan Police of London contacted me to provide some kind of security advice. But when I went to the US, I could sense the great difference between the attitudes of the UK and the US because the FBI, had a proactive meeting with me to talk about and to gather some more intelligence of the transnational repression behavior of China. But we haven't seen anything similar in the UK. We haven't seen anything similar coming from MI5 or MI6, although we know that they are paying more attention towards the Chinese spying issues and having joint press conferences from time to time with other Five Eyes alliance countries. So that is the first thing. And then another thing is that I would say that the UK government is sending mixed messages to the Beijing regime because we are seeing different kinds of departmental approaches, like inconsistency between different departments. On the one hand, the Foreign Office, they may be vocal, they may be active to issue statements to support Hong Kongers or maybe some other UK residents, UK citizens standing up against China, against a Beijing regime. But then on the other hand, we are seeing that, for example, the Chancellor visiting Beijing to ask for more trade deals, this kind of things. But to me, I would say a more sensible approach is to have consistency between different UK government departments. We need a centralized, a consistent Chinese policies. Otherwise, we are simply awarding the Beijing regime for their behavior. If we look at the Hong Kong issue, the 1984 Sino-British Joint Declaration is a clear example that the Beijing regime, the Chinese Communist Party, would not guarantee or honor their promise under international treaty. If we look at the WHO agreement that Beijing regime have signed, they got the duty to report any suspicious or maybe any surge of pandemic, any unknown viruses. But then back in 2020, the Beijing regime failed to do so, and it caused a very, very worldwide problem. We are still seeing the long-lasting impact.
And China just got away with it, didn't they?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So am I right in thinking neither of you have met the foreign minister? Is that have either of you met the foreign minister, or have they asked to meet you since you've had bounties on your head?
I am planning to meet the Foreign Office soon.
The foreign office, but not the minister, or the secretary.
The FCDO and the minister.
Okay, that's great news.
Yeah, but we will see what comes out through the meeting.
Okay. And Finn?
Well, I have met with the ministers, the security ministers as well as the Asia Pacific ministers from the previous government. For the current government, I haven't met those ministers yet, but I do hope that there could be more regular conversations with them, no matter whether it is idea exchange or maybe some kinds of updates on the Hong Kong situation.
Is it even important that they meet with you just to say they have met with you? So the reason I ask this is Kevin and Ted in Australia, who you know so well, they met with our Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, and she put out a photo on her own social media saying, "I'm so happy to meet Kevin and Ted." Now, maybe that doesn't change the national security law in Hong Kong, but boy, it shows, yeah, there's the Foreign Minister of Australia happily greeting, welcoming, opening her door to two Hong Kong activists who China is trying to reach in our country, and she is clearly saying, no, I'm not going to tolerate this. Is that in itself something that's important for the UK to project as well?
I would say it is very important for the minister or the government to meet us, firstly, because they have to understand our situation. We are the only person that could tell them what actually happened to us. Like, we experienced transnational repression, we now have a bounty on our head. So if they want to understand what Hong Kongers feel like in the UK, they have to meet us in order to know about that. And they can't just listen to the propaganda from the Chinese embassy or from the Chinese officials and thought that they knew about what China looks like. They have to listen to people who flee their home country to step into the UK and to tell them the actual real story inside Hong Kong. They can't just listen to Hong Kong officials, listen to John Lee speaking, the Hong Kong representative John Lee, to talk about his propaganda. They have to listen to Hong Kongers who escaped from Hong Kong and listen to why we escaped from Hong Kong, even though it's our home country, that we grew up there, we love there, and we still have to leave. So I think it's really important for the officials to talk to us personally.
And Finn?
Yeah, so on your example regarding Penny Wong agreed to meet Ted and Kevin, two of my friends, I would say it is also a clear example of the different attitudes of the Australian government as well as the UK government. So in terms of the Australian government, we got the foreign secretary level people to meet Hong Kong activists, Hong Kong policy advocates, and while she is so brave to post it on social media, he was not afraid of disclosing such a meeting at all. But on the other hand, for the UK government, for the last 6 years, the only case that the UK foreign secretary agreed to meet Hong Konger is to meet with the son of British citizen Jimmy Lai, Sebastian. And for other Hong Kong people, the foreign secretary or maybe the previous foreign secretaries, they never agreed to meet any of us, no matter whether it's privately or in terms of public settings. So I think that's somehow reflect the anxious attitude, the anxiety of the UK government of, being afraid of, well, making the Beijing regime angry. But I think, well, to stand on the international stage, we need to, well, take our courage to say no to the Beijing regime. And sometimes people, or maybe some economists, or maybe some policymaker think that we need to rely on the Chinese market. That's why we could not make them angry. But in fact, in the UK, we just got 5 to 6% of, well, total trade volume with China. What we need to do is to reduce our dependency on the Chinese market bit by bit, maybe 0.2% every year, etc., to reduce our dependency, such that if there is any kind of, well, maybe military conflict happened between the Beijing and Taiwan, then we would not be impacted. Yeah. But what we are seeing is that we are increasing our dependency on that market. So if something happened, we will just being dragged into that turmoil. So that is something that the UK government should think about.
And I want to end on this note. You two, you use the word there, courage, and it's very clear to have this in spades. And this is no judgment on anybody who you know who doesn't want to be an activist, because we all understand the huge price that involves. But do you think the bounties are working to silence people in the Hong Kong community? Do you think actually the CCP is achieving its objectives when it issues these arrest warrants, when it issues these bounties? And maybe it's not going to silence you two because you're incredibly brave and you're sitting here doing these interviews. But do you see effects of this elsewhere in your networks? And what's it like for the people that you know in Hong Kong? You alluded to this earlier, Chloe. Is it difficult for them now to even have an interest in politics?
I would say in short term, of course, it created a chilling effect on Hong Kongers. As I mentioned, some of my friends are now say that they are scared and they don't want to reach out to me. However, in long term, I believe that these kind of dictatorship regimes would not stand long, which means that because they are doing because they don't allow their people to speak out for what they want, they don't allow any civil society to exist, there would be someone who in the future think that these things doesn't make sense at all and would try to stand out and fight against the regime. So I would say in short term, it might work for some people, but in the long term, they can't silence everyone, especially for us who have already stand out and speak out or already on their target. We would definitely help and try to find our alliance to see how can we keep fighting for Hong Kong's freedom and democracy in the future.
I totally agree with Chloe on that analysis. I would say Hong Kongers, we are resilient. As long as we got the support, we got the democratic countries on our back, I believe we will try to keep fighting for democracy and freedom. And even though if we are being more isolated by the Beijing regime, we will still trying to do so. Look at the Tibetan people, look at the Uyghur people. They keep fighting despite there any kinds of, well, suppression in their homeland, including genocide to the Uyghur people. So to us, we are the same in terms of the fighting spirit. So yeah.
And is there anything that just everyday people can do to support Hong Kong?
Yes, so this is a great question because to many people, the Beijing regime seems gigantic. Seems like, well, we couldn't do anything towards this kind of dictatorship. They got so many people, the huge population, the huge business opportunities. But then there are different things that we could do. So back in 2019, when I just relocated to London as a Hong Konger, I told my colleague where I was coming from, where I grew up. Many of them, especially those younger generation, they didn't know Hong Kong. They just think, well, Hong Kong, maybe Japan, maybe in Japan, a Japanese city, or maybe in Korea. But then to some, or maybe older generation, they know, well, Hong Kong is a former British colony. But for the last 6 years, I've witnessed a paradigm shift because of the efforts of the, well, different international, especially English media, reporting of Hong Kong. And the reason why they are reporting on Hong Kong is because of the Hong Kongers' effort in 2019 and beyond. And we are making Hong Kong more, well, I would say, feasible on international as well as different, occasions. So this is very important. This is the first thing. Second thing is that we need to pay more attention. Let's keep our attention on the Beijing behavior. So this is something that we as people, no matter whether it's UK citizens, no matter whether we are American, Australian citizens, we should do, is affecting the national security as well as the economic situation of different democratic countries. So that's why we need to push different democratic governments to have a strategic assessment of the Beijing region threat. We could not repeat our mistakes in the Ukrainian war. So this is something that we need to bear in mind.
And Chloe, is there anything that you think just everyday people can do to support you?
Well, I would say, I mean, anyone in the UK or anyone around the world should stand up for the values that they believe, like democracy, like freedom of speech, freedom of the press. Because if you don't fight for freedom, this dictatorship country will get them away from you. So it's not just about Hong Kong, it's about anyone, anywhere. So if you feel like your freedom is getting taken away, or if you feel that you were threatened because you were like, if you feel that you can't speak freely, you have to fight against it strongly, and you have to keep fighting for what you believe and believe in what you think is right.
Chloe and Finn, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you. I've watched your case, Finn, for several years, so it's really nice to finally have a lovely Australian style coffee with you, maybe next time in Australia. Chloe, good luck, and I hope to see both of you again on this podcast soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thanks so much for joining another episode of Latika Takes, the podcast. I hope you enjoyed that discussion. I was so struck by the pair of them. I really had not appreciated actually how much having a bounty on your head mattered in terms of job prospects, and also what Chloe was talking about there in terms of even applying for universities and making her think twice. It's really so much more than a headline, I think, is what emerged from that conversation when you read and hear that ex-Hong Konger has had a bounty placed on the head, or ex-Hong Konger has had a warrant issued for their arrest. I hope that discussion brought alive what those words actually mean, not just for the day of that news, but for their foreseeable lives. I'll be back again with another episode soon. Thank you very much in the meantime. And if you enjoyed this episode, please do rate and review wherever you find your podcasts, because that will help. Thanks. You've been listening to Latika Takes with me, Latika Burke. You can find my work at latikambirk.com and this podcast where you find all your podcasts. See you next time.